Mr. President, in recent weeks, several federal judges have issued orders blocking unlawful actions taken by the Trump administration. In response, the administration's officials and allies have made worrisome statements criticizing federal judges and the process of judicial review. Elon Musk, an unelected bureaucrat who is assisting this administration, has repeatedly called for the impeachment of federal judges and questioned the lifetime appointment of federal judges that is enshrined in Article 3 of the Constitution. President Trump's choice of Deputy Director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, suggested on a podcast that the president set up a fake courtroom in the White House where, quote, he can just start making judicial decisions. Mr. Bongino added, I quote, if the judge is the executive, why can't the executive be the judge? Ask your stupid liberal friends that, Mr. Bongino is quoted as saying. As a reminder, Mr. Bongino is second in command at the FBI, the most powerful investigative agency in the world. If he sounds like a political animal out of his element, you would not be wrong. But Mr. Bongino is not alone. Last week, a nominee to a senior position at the Department of Justice testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, quote, there is no hard and fast rule about whether in every instance a public official is bound by a court decision. Let that sink in for a moment. This is a person who wants a senior position at the Department of Justice, testifying under oath and saying, there is no hard and fast rule about whether in every instance a public official is bound by a court decision. And in a social media post, Vice President Vance falsely asserted that, quote, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. This is merely the latest in a long line of claims by the Vice President that a president can defy court orders. And President Trump himself recently posted, and I quote, he who saves his country does not violate any law. A line that echoes others who believe they're above the law. A rationalization more common to leaders of a political coup in a banana republic. Let me repeat that quote from President Trump. Quote, he who saves his country does not violate any law, close quote. These efforts to intimidate judges and undermine the rule of law do not stop with these statements. The Speaker of the House said he agrees with Vice President Vance and urged the courts to, quote, take a step back, close quote. 3 members of the House of Representatives have introduced articles of impeachment against federal judges simply because they rule against the Trump administration. These remarks that I've quoted are not only wrong, they are constitutionally dangerous, and they pose a serious threat to our constitutional order and the separation of powers. Since the Supreme Court's landmark Marbury versus Madison decision in 1803, there has been a broad bipartisan consensus throughout our history that, in the words of Chief Justice Marshall, and I quote, it is emphatically the province and duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is, close quote. When it comes to interpreting and applying the law, the courts have the last word. And that responsibility takes on an outsized importance when an executive shows little regard for the limits of the Constitution, as this administration already has. Under Article 2 of the Constitution, the executive branch is charged with, quote, taking care that the laws be faithfully executed, unquote. But President Trump and his administration have ignored that responsibility. Let me give you one clear-cut, unequivocal example. President Trump summarily fired 18 inspectors general weeks into his presidency. He wanted these investigative officials out of the picture. He did this despite the law that requires him, as president, to inform the Congress of a decision to dismiss or transfer an inspector general and provide a detailed explanation for doing so. That's what the law requires. at least 30 days before taking any action against him. When the executive branch blatantly violates the law, it is essential that the other branches of government fulfill their constitutional role and responsibilities. Thankfully, in the first weeks of the new Trump administration, the judicial branch has lived up to its responsibility. Judges have carefully considered the cases before them and, where appropriate, provided a check on the administration when it oversteps. Now, the fact that a court has made a decision does not mean you have to agree with it. Listen to what John Kennedy, a Republican senator from Louisiana, recently admonished two Trump nominees who suggested the executive branch can ignore a court order. Here's what my colleague, Senator Kennedy, said, quote, "Don't ever, ever take the position that you're not going to follow the order of a federal court, ever. Now, you can disagree with it within the bounds of legal ethics. You can criticize it, you can appeal it, or you can resign." Now, I've disagreed with judicial decisions, including decisions of the Supreme Court. When that happens, I explain why I disagree. But I have never advocated ignoring or defying a court order. I never will. More than 60 years ago, President John Kennedy spoke about the importance of the rule of law in a speech at Vanderbilt University. As President Kennedy put it, and I quote, "For one man to defy a law or court order he does not like is to invite others to defy those which they do not like, leading to a breakdown of all justice and all order. We cannot allow any administration to defy a court order, period. And we cannot stand idly by as the president and his allies undermine the judiciary by attacking judges." That's why I introduced the resolution we are considering today. I want to thank my colleagues who co-sponsored it and are joining on the floor in this block of time. Our resolution simply affirms that the Constitution vests the judicial power in the federal courts, and it affirms that both the Constitution and established precedent require the executive branch to comply with all federal court rulings. These are not partisan talking points. They are basic principles of constitutional law, so fundamental and so essential to our constitutional order that it should go without saying. But in light of recent comments and actions by President Trump, Vice President Vance, and his administration and allies, some things must be said. So I ask my colleagues to say with one clear voice, the United States Senate supports the Constitution, the judicial branch, and the rule of law. Every member of this body has sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I urge my colleagues to fulfill their oaths today. I yield the floor.